Welcome to the National Political Debates, brought to you by the Jamaica Debates Commission in association with Jamaica Public Service Company Limited, changing lives with their energy, and the D&G Foundation, here for Jamaicans, here for Jamaica. Tonight, we come to you live from the Faculty of Law at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. The final debate in the series focuses on leadership. Our moderator is Dervan Malcolm.
Good evening. Welcome to the final of 3 political debates organized by the Jamaica Debates Commission and staged live before an audience at the Faculty of Law on the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies. The debates are intended to assist in identifying, clarifying, and understanding the issues being presented in this general election campaign from the standpoint of the respective political parties. This evening's debate focuses on leadership. As is customary in television debates production, the audience is prohibited from applauding the debaters, except for now when we announce each debater. For the People's National Party, Mrs. Portia Simpson Miller. And for the Jamaica Labour Party, Mr. Andrew Holness. Our panel of questioners are Dion Jackson Miller from the RGR News Center. Franklin McKnight from IRI FM and the North Coast Times. As a new feature for this debate, the third questioner is replaced by us taking a question from the audience. The questions to be posed by persons in the audience are their own and have only been reviewed by our other questioners this evening to ensure that they meet the same rules within which they are operating. I'm your moderator, Dervan Malcolm. The guidelines for tonight's debates have been previously agreed and are posted on the Debate Commission's website at www.jamaicadebatescommission.org. That's www.jamaicadebatescommission.org. The guidelines include questions being no longer than 30 seconds and each debater being allowed 90 seconds to respond to each question, with rebuttals being limited to 45 seconds. The panel's questions posed in tonight's debate are created solely by the journalists and are not influenced by the Jamaica Debates Commission in any way. You can also follow the debates on the Debates Commission's website, and you can send your comments to us on Twitter at our Jamaica Votes Twitter account. Arising from a coin toss earlier, Mrs. Portia Simpson Miller of the PNP will make the opening statement, while Mr. Andrew Holness of the JLP will make the final of the 2 statements at the end of the debate. And now, the 2-minute opening statement from Mrs. Simpson Miller.
Good evening. Our country is in crisis. The economy is shrinking. Unemployment is increasing. It is now up to 12.3%. Poverty has doubled. Hopelessness is increasing under this government. We have to unite and work together to grow the economy. When we form the next government, we will expand educational opportunities at all levels, finance a national export strategy, place a special focus on SMEs, negotiate an extended fund facility with the IMS, focus on non-traditional sectors such as ICTs and the creative and cultural industries. During this debate, I look forward to providing more details on the Jamaica Emergency Employment Program and corruption, and certainly other programs of the People's National Party. Some of the successes of our administrations have been unprecedented expansion of infrastructure, roads, airports, seaports. We passed 12 consecutive IMF tests. We mobilized record level of foreign direct investment. In fact, my last year in office, when I was Prime Minister, unemployment was under 10%. We brought poverty from 30% to under 10%. The debt was 950 billion. Now it has grown to 1.6 trillion, an increase of almost 70%. We facilitated GDP growth of 3%. I presented the country.
Thank you very
the
much,
best
Mrs. Simpson-Miller. Let us now hear Mr. Holness's 2-minute opening statement.
Good evening, friends. I'm a product of independent Jamaica. I believe I was called to serve the people of my country, and I have dedicated my life to this. From the time of my youth, I have worked with and represented the people of Jamaica to improve the quality of their lives. Starting with my work in the voluntary sector to improve the lives of inner city children, to representing the people of my constituency in Parliament for 14 years, to being Minister of Education for the last 4 years, and now as your Prime Minister. I'm humbled and privileged to have had this opportunity, and I want to continue to serve you, the people of this great country, to fulfill our true promise and destiny. It is natural, inevitable, and indeed irresistible that new generations of leaders will emerge in any nation. This process of renewal strengthens and guarantees the continuity of the society, and when graciously handled, is a heritage of dignity that is passed between generations. Like many of you, I have been reflecting on the leadership change that has taken place in the last 3 months, that Jamaica should produce a post-independence leader on the eve of our 50th Jubilee is a providential alignment of opportunities and challenges. The real issue of this election is whether or not Jamaica will seize the moment, reaffirm this change, and step into our future with new generations of leaders. Tonight, in answering the questions, I will give insights into my leadership and into a shared vision.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Our first question tonight comes from Dion Jackson Miller of the RGR News Center. It will be directed to Mrs. Simpson-Miller.
Mr. Simpson-Miller, you mentioned the debt in your opening statement. Also, your manifesto on page 9 speaks about the, quote, vicious stranglehold of the national debt and says a clear, realistic plan for the improvement of the main debt ratios is needed. Please give us specific steps that your administration would take to get there.
Well, we will, upon being re-elected as government, move to economic growth and development, to get the economy to grow, to put people to work, and to bring investments into the country, both foreign investments as we work with our local investors to invest more into their country. We will also be looking at a number of plans so that we will be able to do so. One is to negotiate with the IMF to negotiate with the IMF an extended, we will, when we are returned to power, negotiate an extended fund facility. This will give us the space and will give us greater time to ensure stability of the economy that is now in shambles. It will also give us an opportunity to grow the economy as well as to create jobs. And we will be working with exporters to ensure that we put in place the kind of financing so that exporters in every category will be able to export so we can bring more foreign exchange into the countries, as well as looking at the BRIC countries to expand our reach in terms of trade as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Simpson-Miller. Mr. Holness, your rebuttal.
I just wanted to point out very quickly that we are in an IMF arrangement which ends in May next year, and the country director has pointed out already that there can be no renegotiation of this present deal. I suspect what the leader of the opposition is saying is that they would go into another IMF deal after May. And maybe there might be need for that. but we have this present one which we have to fulfill, and the government has already started doing that. As it relates to reducing debt, debt is a function primarily of...
Go ahead, Mr. Holness. Oh, you're finished? Okay.
You interrupted, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Holness. Dion Jackson Miller has indicated that she has a follow-up question.
You predicate at least part of your answer on the issue of growth, Mr. Simpson Miller. Just last week, though, the head of the IMF said that there is no country in the world that will be immune from the crisis we see not only unfolding but escalating. How does this affect your prediction for growth?
We're all aware of that. But we had serious challenges when I was Prime Minister. And when I left office, we had 3% growth. We did it before, and we can do it again. We can work to achieve growth and development for this country.
Thank you, Mrs. Simpson Miller. Your rebuttal, Mr. Holness.
You know, growth is not so much talk. Growth is serious action. It's about getting the investors to come here. It's about aligning the variables in the macro environment, which we have done in 4 years, which has PNP has tried to do it in 18, was never successful. We have done that. The next phase of our growth strategy is to get the microeconomic variables aligned so that once you have a strong macro environment, the efficiency of markets can take.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. And now Franklin McKnight for his question to Mr. Holness.
Mr. Holness, for several months, the government in which you were a cabinet minister held up the extradition of Christopher Dudas Coke. Do you accept that this hurt the country in many serious ways, and why should you and the JLP that formed the government not be punished by the voters for it?
I want to make something absolutely clear, that as it relates to the Manat issue, I was on the extreme periphery of that matter. I was, however, a member of a cabinet, and I cannot escape or deny the responsibility that comes with that. The Jamaica Labour Party and the former Prime Minister already admitted that the affair was not handled in the best way, and we have paid the consequence of that. In terms of being punished by the electorate, I think the electorate of Jamaica has advanced in such a way that they are able to look at genuine efforts being made by the party and by the government to redeem itself and to offer itself for further service to the country. I place my hands in the fate and judgment of the people.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Your rebuttal, Mrs. Simpson Miller.
Well, Mr. Holness said he was not close to the situation. It cannot be true. He was a member of the then cabinet. And so he's a party and would have been a party to the decisions taken concerning the extradition that caused so much pain and hurt in this country. And it is as a result of bad management and political favoritism of the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet. None can escape this. The Prime Minister should never have inserted himself in the process in the first place. We have dealt successfully with extradition issues.
Thank you,
in the
Mrs.
past.
Simpson Miller. Our first question now comes from the audience. And the audience member holding number 6, please step up to the microphone and pose your question to Portia Simpson Miller.
Good evening, Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller. Visiting from the Jamaican diaspora, all the way from California. Do you think it is time for Jamaica to move away from the Westminster model of governance?
I am in support of that, and People's National Party government, we will be looking at the head of Jamaica and looking at our Constitution and the removal of the Queen as head of Jamaica so that we can have a Jamaican Queen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mrs. Simpson Miller, rebuttal, Mr. Holness.
On approaching our 50th year, it is the opportune time to reflect on the nature of our government. The signals are mixed, but clearly it is time for us to establish truly our own independence.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. And now, Dion Jackson Miller, your question to Mr. Holness.
Mr. Holness, Jamaica has an international reputation for homophobia. What do you think of former Prime Minister Golding's statement that homosexuals were not welcome in his cabinet, and do you share that sentiment?
The challenge that Jamaica faces is that in the modern world, there are minimum standards of human rights which we must meet. And Jamaica has done so on all occasions. However, as a society, we have to determine what our civil rights are, which are slightly different. We have taken steps in our parliament with the Bill of Rights, which is an advance in the right direction. We are an open society, and the issues that are difficult, uncomfortable to discuss, as a society progresses, these issues are being discussed. People are entitled to their opinion, and as well as I am entitled to mine. But as leader of the country, I have to respect everybody's opinion and make sure that the institutions of freedom are well in place so that the debate can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Your rebuttal, Mrs. Simpson-Miller.
Our administration believes in protecting the human rights of all Jamaicans. No one should be discriminated against because of their sexual orientation. Government should provide the protection. And I think that we should have a look at the Buggery law, and that members of parliament should be given the opportunity to vote with their conscience on consultation with their constituents. But for me, I do not support the position of the former Prime Minister, because people should be appointed to position based on their ability to manage and
Thank
to
you,
lead.
Mrs. Simpson-Miller. Dion Jackson-Miller has indicated that she will now take her second follow-up question to Mr. Holness.
Mr. Holness, do you share the sentiment that you don't want any homosexuals in your cabinet?
My sentiments reflect the sentiments of the country. The Prime Minister has a discretion, but that discretion cannot be exercised in a vacuum.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Mrs. Simpson-Miller.
I certainly do not pry, or do I have any intention of prying in the private business of anyone. I would appoint anyone with the ability, the capacity, and the capability to manage in my cabinet.
Thank you, Mrs. Simpson-Miller. Franklin McKnight, your question now to Mrs. Simpson-Miller.
Mrs. Simpson-Miller, the Trafigura matter is before the courts now as a request of the Dutch authorities, who want statements under judicial supervision. But for us Jamaicans, would you as Prime Minister or leader of the opposition after the next elections agree for a commission of inquiry into the $30 million donation or contribution to help us decide once and for all whether there was corruption and who it points to in this entire affair?
I want to clarify one thing. The Dutch authorities did not come to Jamaica to investigate the Trafigura. The Dutch authorities were written to by former Prime Minister Bruce Golding and invited to come to investigate officials of the People's National Party. Not the Dutch authorities. It was on the invitation of the government that changed the law in Parliament to allow it to happen, although they claim in the extradition matter that they were protecting the rights of a Jamaican. For the People's National Party, to the governing party, we have no rights. Certainly, we have nothing to hide. And anything that can clear the air on Trafigura, which was a contribution to a political party, just like now in the elections, both parties are receiving contributions, I'm sure, from businesses, both overseas and locally, who would not want to be identified because they might fear victimization on the election of one party over the other party. And so I believe that the Trafigura issue was a contribution to the People's National Party. We have nothing to hide, and I would not be opposed to an inquiry into that matter, only if the government will also explain the maybe Johnson bribery.
Thank you, Mrs. Simpson-Miller. Your rebuttal, Mr. Holness.
Well, there's several things. First of all, the accurate statement is that Trafigura, which is a Dutch company, attracted the attention of the Dutch government even before the Labour Party assumed office, and tried to get the hearing in Jamaica, but was not, because the PNP was still the government. When we became the government, we ensured that the investigation was possible. But then I find it very worrisome that the leader of the opposition would suggest that the government should not do what is required of it to meet its international obligations to investigate a matter of corruption. You are saying that because you're a political party, we should not have investigated.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. We now go back to the audience for another question, and the audience member. You had indicated a follow-up, Mr. McKnight? Okay,
Yes,
go ahead.
Mr. Simpson-Miller, are you saying that you would authorize an inquiry only if it was tied to something else? Or are you saying now to the Jamaican people that as Prime Minister, I would authorize an inquiry, and as opposition leader, I would support it?
I have no difficulty at all supporting, or as Prime Minister, supporting an inquiry. Because the only thing that can come from the inquiry was that the contribution was to the People's National Party. And Trafigura raises some very important questions, and that is the financing of political parties. And that is an issue to be put on the table and to be discussed publicly.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson-Miller. Rebuttal, Mr.
I
Holness.
see really no need for a commission of inquiry. All that the leader of the opposition needs to do is to withdraw her claim in the court for the matter to be heard in private.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Now we take that question from the audience. Audience member with ticket number 8, please step up to the microphone and pose your question to Andrew Holness.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Holness. Mr. Holness, the fact that you have experience in only one government ministry for a period of only 4 years, and absolutely no experience in foreign policy or interaction with any foreign leader, what makes you prepared to be Prime Minister of a country in crisis?
Well, it's a very good question. Firstly, my experience as a Minister of Education was one in which I had charge of the second largest ministry in the government. I had to deal with the largest public sector group in the government. But more than that, not just the size of the ministry, I was able to operate in a time of crisis, increase the services offered in education whilst my budget was being cut. I have not heard any complaints about a reduction in service or loss of teaching jobs. That is the ingenuity and creativity of a youthful mind, of a new generation of efficient thinking and management. I thank you for the question, but I would also point out that I have benefited significantly from the experience of others who have invested a lot of time and effort in me, not just in the political sphere, but all Jamaicans who have provided me with support and ideas. I don't claim it all on myself. I would also want to say that I believe, as I said in my opening statement, that I have a charge and a mission to do good for this country and to help this country fulfill its true potential.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Mr. Simpson-Miller, your rebuttal.
I come with 17 years of experience as a Minister of Government and then for a short time, Prime Minister. My track record is there. I am tested and I am proven. I have the ability and the skills, and my experience brought me to a number of international meetings, having to meet with international leaders, from prime ministers to presidents to kings. And so I know I have the ability to and can. It's not just about age, it's about the ability to lead and manage and the experience.
Thank you, Mrs. Simpson-Miller. Now, Dion Jackson-Miller, your question to Mrs. Simpson-Miller.
Mrs. Simpson-Miller, you would be aware that at least some of your critics question your intellectual capacity to lead. Over the past 4 years, for the most part, it's been Dr. Peter Phillips and Dr. Omar Davies leading the charge for the opposition in Parliament. Instead of now running ads trying to persuade the public of your leadership capabilities, why didn't you use the past 4 years of weekly parliamentary sittings to more effectively lead and engage in policy debates?
I certainly participated in the Parliament, but I'm not a one-band person. I am the leader of the team, and I give my team the opportunity to perform and to participate. I do not believe in the Jamaican language, hogging the show. I believe that my team can best learn, particularly the younger ones, when they're able to stand on their feet, to speak to the issues in the Parliament, and to participate. That is how we are preparing the next generation of Jamaicans to take leadership of the various areas of the People's National Party and the various sections of the party.
Thank you, Mrs. Simpson-Miller. Mr. Holness, your rebuttal.
Well, since it's a question on leadership, leadership is as leadership does. And if anyone wants to see what experience in leadership is, then we should examine achievement. And what I've tried to do in my short time is to be clear in the achievements, set goals and set targets, and build institutions that will remain after you have left the scene. I know that as a minister, I have put in place institutions that will change the education landscape and outlast me, a legacy for generations to come. I'm sure the leader of the opposition will point out her legacy.
Thank you, Mr. Holness. Mr. Franklin McKnight, your question now for Mr. Holness.
Mr. Holness, though you have repeatedly said you want to tell the country the truth, you have wasted several opportunities to tell Jamaicans how bad our finances and economy are. Please use this opportunity to tell us what to expect in the next year of an administration to be run by you, and particularly
well, let's
about
get to
the
it
bitter
quickly.
medicine.
Let's get to it quickly. I think we've all spoken in generalities about what is coming in the future. And it has created some level of uncertainty, and with that uncertainty, fear. I personally am very certain about what I will be doing, and I have no fear of the future. The first thing we have to do is to confront the growing national debt. And in doing that, there are some reforms of the economy which we must undertake. The first reform is the tax system. Whenever the population hears taxes, immediately there is a fear. From the government's perspective, there is a fear of a social reaction. We see it happening in Greece and in other countries in Europe. We don't want that. So the first thing that we have already started to do is to engage all the key stakeholders to come up with a plan that will be fair and equitable and give everyone a voice in that plan. And we have started that. The first thing you will see happening next year is the tabling of a green paper on tax reform. The other thing that we have to do is confront our public sector in terms of size and its size relative to GDP, the wage bill. Whenever we talk about that...
Thank you, Mr. Holness.
We
your
need time to do
rebuttal,
this.
Mrs. Simpson-Miller.
The Prime Minister spoke to the public sector transformation. It is not as simplistic as cutting jobs, and I give an example. In the public sector, we have 3 ministries that are employer